Hey, everybody, welcome to the show. It's Will. So glad to have you watching and listening and tuning in. Excited for this episode. We're going to have Micah Brandenburg here. And if you're a CEO or part of a leadership team, you're frustrated by the lack of results in your growth strategy, or maybe you're looking to leave a legacy in your company so that it outlasts you. You don't want to miss the next hour. Mike is a fascinating guy. He's really into analytics and data and can kind of just cut through the fog of war for a lot of companies. We've had some great chats off mic, and so I'm glad to be able to record this. We're discussing all of this and more here on the Fire at Will podcast.
Coming to you from the heart of downtown Greenville, it's the show about thriving in a local economy. You're listening to Fire at Will with your host, Will Stewart.
Michael, welcome to the show. So glad to have you here.
Thanks, Will. Fun to be on.
Yeah, so we go way back, I guess. We were interacting a lot, and then kind of like there was this fall off, and we've gotten to know each other just recently again. But started when you were at Worthwhile. And
you're right.
We were doing a project for you, but tell for the people that don't know kind of who you are, the 6 people in Greenville who don't know who Micah Brandenburg is. Tell us a little bit about you, kind of your journey from kind of where you started in Rhode Island up to here.
Oh, cool, awesome. So grew up in Rhode Island, the littlest state in the country, but the most amazing state in the country, and we could talk a lot about that. A lot of wonderful things going on there, but. I came down here to Greenville, South Carolina, for the first time about 18 years ago. And I've been here on and off since then and just love it. It's been a great place for my wife and I to raise our 2 kids, and we're just delighted to be in Greenville, South Carolina.
So now you're a business consultant, a coach. How would you describe what you do and who you are?
Yeah. So I really would describe myself as a business growth consultant. So I really focus on working with companies who want to grow in a very rapid way, but yet a very sustainable way. Because I think there's a lot of tactics that we try to leverage in marketing and sales that drive top-line revenue in the short term, but they're really not sustainable for the long term.
Yeah, there's a lot that I want to unpack with that. I'm excited to talk to you about several things, including the entrepreneurial operating system, which I had not heard of until
awesome.
You were the first one to introduce me to that, and I haven't researched it too much, so I'm excited to unpack that a little bit more. But tell me, what kind of got you to this place where you are in your life? Because I know you have kind of a varied background. You're not just it wasn't cut and dry. You go to school and just do this thing, right? Yeah,
I always say when I describe my background to people, they're either going to think I'm schizophrenic or I'm a Renaissance man. So I'll leave it to you to figure that out. But yeah, I grew up from a really young age. I grew up in a family of classical musicians. So my dad's a blue collar entrepreneur. My mom's an educator. But really, one of the threads for us as a family was everybody played classical music. And so I'm a classically trained cellist. Wow. I started doing that when I was 5. I did that really seriously up until I finished high school. I went to the summer music festivals. I thought I was doing that, going to conservatory. But then life took a different turn. I ultimately came down here to go to school at Bob Jones University about 20 years ago, sort of pursuing a ministerial calling. And it was through that experience that I was like, I don't think this is actually what I'm called to do. I think I'm really sort of called in my life to really be in business. Yeah. And so I spent the first 10 years of my career in finance, led teams. I was working in credit analysis, underwriting. I led some teams. I started the mortgage division at the height of the credit crisis back in 2008, which was really fun.
Great timing.
Here in Greenville, I was with a colleague. Worked in commercial banking, actually up in New England for 4 or 5 years for the Royal Bank of Scotland, financing sort of small business and mid-market companies. And then about 6 years ago, I really just got the entrepreneurial bug to be driving the strategy of an organization rather than being the banker sitting on the other side of results and saying to CEOs, hey, how did you do it?
Right.
And so that led me to Greenville to help turn around a really great technology company called Worthwhile that's here in Greenville. And I had a great run there for about 4 years. We 10x the company valuation. We grew revenue. We grew really on every front. And then it was time for me to move on and really to fulfill sort of a lifelong, I wouldn't call it a lifelong desire, but a desire I've probably had for about 10 years to be in the world of consulting.
What do you think? Like, 'cause it's super interesting that you come from a music background.
Oh, yeah.
Because my family's musical. I come from that background as well. My wife does as well.
Classical, jazz, what kind of music?
So kind of more of a folk would be my background, folk country.
I love it.
And then my wife's background was classical, folk, bluegrass, that sort of thing. So she's one with her instrument. She's a phenomenal violinist and really, really good. But so how does music in that culture, how does that help you be a better business consultant?
Yeah.
Is there any overlap?
Yes.
Is there a Venn diagram there of something interesting?
Yeah, I think there's probably a couple of threads that we could pull out of that.
Yeah.
So I think one of the things, it's a pro and it's a con of classical music, right?
Yeah.
But certain forms of music are really social. So you almost practice through playing with the band. Whereas a lot of times in classical music, you're really sort of solo. You're practicing the scales, the etudes, all that sort of stuff. And I think for me, I really found out how to learn through music. Mm. I found a lot of discipline and sort of perseverance in doing tough and difficult things and persisting in that. But I think there's really also the social dynamic of music, right?
Yeah, right.
So one of my favorite forms of music back when I was playing a lot would be like chamber music, like string quartets, piano trios, right? And so you're playing with a handful of other people, and when it comes to things like phrasing or nuance or how to approach a section, you're really dialoguing with people and using persuasion to convince them that your perspective is the right way, right? Without ticking them off because you're going to live with them forever
right.
or for at least the next few weeks or a year.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a really social dynamic. And then certainly on top of that, math is a big part of music too.
Yeah, it is. And it seems like you're more of an analytics kind of math guy, right?
I would say that that's true about myself, but I would say I'm really interested in sort of customer experience and empathizing with people and really engaging into the feelings and the thoughts and the beliefs that we all have.
Yeah. And I think those two can be married very easily.
Oh, yes.
As long as you understand the value in both sides.
Yeah, it's really the quant and the qual, right? It's sort of the leveraging quantitative data that we can measure in numbers and facts, and then also looking at sort of qualitative data of feelings and emotions and even psychographics in marketing.
Yeah, so that's fantastic. So, so moving forward past the financial stuff, now you're, on your own, consulting, that sort of thing. So congratulations on that.
You.
That's always an exciting adventure.
It's a good way to put it.
As someone who I've been self-employed or an entrepreneurial since my high school days. So I had one stint in a marketing agency, but besides that, and then one other stint, it's like I've always had a business, some kind of side hustle. So I totally get it. So let's talk about the entrepreneurial operating system, because I really want to get into that. I know that's something that's kind of a framework, I guess, like how you talk to businesses. Is that right?
It is. I would say it's certainly one of the service offerings that I do. I help companies adopt EOS or the entrepreneurial operating system. Mm-hmm. But I would say more than that, you're right. It is sort of a way that I view the world through. So let me sort of step back and give you the bird's eye view about where this came from. So about 10 years ago, a guy, Gino Wickman, wrote a book called Traction. Mm-hmm. And some people aren't familiar with EOS, but they've heard of Traction. They're like, oh yeah, somebody gave me a book years ago on that topic, right?
Yeah.
And really, the cornerstone principles of that book were turned into a business management methodology. And the premise that underlies it, Will, is really this premise. If you're a CEO, you're an entrepreneur in a given year, you probably come across hundreds of distinct issues.
Yeah.
But they're really symptoms. They're not actually root cause issues. And if we could boil them down to root causes, EOS says that there's really 6 sort of core areas of business that we need to strengthen. And so to the extent that we can focus on those 6 core areas, we can strengthen those 6 core areas, a lot of the other issues will take care of themselves. And so what I love about it is just the simplicity of it. It takes complex business and it makes it very approachable for everyone. 6 areas.
Yeah. And that's so important because, when you get into business and you're making your craft, whether it's a widget or pottery or whatever it might be, it's easy to have the fog of war, where you're just kind of caught up in making the thing and responding and reacting to the problems of your business without really putting it in a framework or being able to kind of step back and view the analytics of it and understand it's all about information, right?
And if we think about it, really businesses can be broken down in the most simple level into 3 core components, right? Mm-hmm. So you talked about getting caught up in making your thing. That's really one of those 3 components, right? That's like operations, operations or delivery. But we've got sort of the revenue generation component of the business. We've got sort of the finance and administration component of the business. So yeah, I think the beauty is it's a really well-rounded way of looking at business.
Yeah. And when you think that, when you say that entrepreneurs and probably the businesses that you're working with now are maybe they've figured out this, but the financial administration part, especially for entrepreneurs, the mom and pop shops, that's probably where they struggle the most, I'd say.
Yeah. I mean, I would say I've yet to meet a business that has, so my focus is really working with B2B services companies that have up to 200 employees. I've yet to sit down with anybody that has it all figured out, right?
Yeah.
Everything is humming along well. They're leading well. I mean, we're all finite human beings. We all have ups and downs. We all have issues. And I've been in the biggest organizations in the world, and I've been in some of the smallest ones. And what I've come to realize is that they all seem to share the same core issues, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think you're right. Finance is one of those issues, but I would say, there are a host of other issues too.
Right. Yeah. And it's probably comforting, I think, for those who are starting out to know that the big guys who look, really smooth and good are still struggling, because the world changes, it evolves, and there's always things we have to adapt to.
Yeah. Through finance, through working in tech, at the last company I was at, we were blessed to engage with some very large organizations, $1 billion plus in revenue organizations. And I think there's a common misconception among, small business owners or entrepreneurs that those companies have it figured out. But I'm going to tell you firsthand, I've been in many of those organizations, and culturally and management-wise, they're oftentimes have a whole another layer of challenges that we don't have at the smaller company level.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you get certain sizes, the problem. It gets the more money, more problems rule, but, it's...
Same core issues, different manifestations, I would say.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. So the six frameworks for the entrepreneur operating system, let's talk about that. What are those six things?
Sure. So really the six core areas that EOS would encourage each of us to consider and focus in on would be vision. I'll go around and I'll give the names and then maybe come back around a second time and give a little info. Vision, people, data, issues processing, process development, and traction. And so sort of the core issue with vision is it clear where we're headed? So this isn't just like, do you have a vision statement, right?
Right.
Okay, that's part of it. But is it clear where we're headed by answering sort of 8 key questions? And then secondly, is that vision shared by everybody in the organization?
Yeah.
Most companies don't have the first one down, but almost nobody has the second one down of that clarity then being shared by all, right? And then sort of with people, a lot of us have heard the illusion, like the Jim Collins illusion of like having the right people in the right seats. And ultimately EOS focuses in on a methodology of hiring the right people, putting them in the right seats, and then helping you and I as leaders to lead and to manage well, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And the data is really just about, hey, how do we make decisions in our business in a quantitative way based upon data, not just based upon emotion, or as a former colleague of mine would say, belly data, sort of intuition-based data, right?
A lot of people run on that kind of data.
Belly data is very, very frequently used,
That's
right? And then just other areas. How do we solve issues? How do we document processes in our business so that consistency in how we deliver our services is really good, and so customer experience goes up? And then sort of this last area of traction, which harkens back to the title of this book that Gino Wickman wrote 10 years ago, is really about how do we operate the business in like 90-day intervals and have very clear priorities that everybody is lined up to and marching the ball down the field. So,
yeah. And that's so smart to think of it in those 90-day chunks.
Yes.
That helps. I get stuck in the year. I think of life in
a year's too long. 30 days, it feels a bit too short to see some movement, although we need to be focused, day by day, week by week. But 90 days it's a good rhythm.
Yeah,
it's a really good rhythm.
It's a great takeaway for me. I'm going to start thinking about that. So let's talk about those first two core components.
Let's do it.
Because that's something I've been thinking about and fascinated about recently. We have a client called His Way at Work that helps faith-based CEOs or CEOs who have a strong personal faith live out their faith in helping with like values for the company. They're not making anybody believe anything. They're not forcing anybody to do anything that they don't want to do. But it's more just basically saying my faith says that we should, be kind to other people.
Yeah.
And how do we be kind to other people in our company? How do we take care of people? It was super fascinating kind of seeing how they dealt with that. And then as you think about the workforce today, there's so many opportunities, in the U.S. where you can work anywhere. If you're talented, or even if you're marginally talented, you can make it.
If you're a marginal software engineer, you can really make it today.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And even if you're bad, you can just go find another job and hopefully they'll learn about your previous experience. So values and culture is so important. It's something I've been thinking about, with my company, with Ninth Central. How do we foster that and that sort of thing? What are some tips that you give, as you're consulting? Some maybe I should ask this: what are some common places that businesses struggle? Ways that they're not communicating properly, maybe to their people, and then. What are some ways that people can avoid that? Because a lot of it's about intentionality.
It is. And so we're talking about this specifically in the context of like vision and people.
Right, yeah.
Okay, cool. So yeah, I think the first challenge that we have like under this idea of vision is like, do we have clarity on where we're headed, right? Because it's really darn difficult to communicate something if you don't know what it is you're communicating, right?
Yeah.
So I think classically where organizations get held up on this is, I would say for the last 10 years, maybe even 20 years, like we've been in this feeling that in order to have a successful business, every entrepreneur and CEO knows that they should have vision, mission, and value statement, right?
Yeah. It's buzzwords, basically, now.
It is buzzwords, and they often live as a plaque on the wall.
Yeah.
But the two challenges that people struggle with is, how do I create those? And then secondly, why do I need those, right? And then I'll actually add a third one in of how do we cultivate those, right? So I feel like those are some of the biggest challenges actually around vision. Does that make sense?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and cultivating it is such an important, sharing that vision and then growing it into other people.
Yeah.
Is the biggest challenge, I think. Like it is, as I think about even like our company, it's just like like verbalizing it and then helping other people say, okay, this is important to me too, and it should be important to me too.
Yeah. So the first thing I'll maybe clarify for people who are listening is like, what are values? And I would answer that, and I would just say, values really define who we are and what we stand for, right? And one of the primary importance of values is that as you begin to build a team, or if you're further down, that rabbit hole and you've got 20 people or 50 people or 70 people on board, I think what we really want to do is we want to hire people who are in alignment with our values. So it's not just about, competency to do the job. That's being in the right seat in one sense, in the Jim Collins illusion. But recruiting the right people is all about bringing people into your organization that value the same thing that you do.
Yeah.
One of the things I literally just said, I recorded the video a couple days ago on this topic that I posted on LinkedIn, and that is you cannot write a detailed enough job description to cover how your employees should act in every scenario, right? Yeah. So one of the incredible importance of having values and then hiring people who have those same values is that you're putting guardrails or a framework in place of how to think and how to act in a way that's in alignment with who the company is. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I think that is the key. Like that's, obviously you need to be able to verbalize it.
Correct.
But finding the people who naturally believe those things and it's in their core,
yes,
is such an important
it's
step.
Huge. And then I think beyond that, what's really important is we want to have I call them like rhythms or rituals in our business. That can sound kind of weird to say rituals. Kind of sounds like we're at a church service, but rhythms are rituals whereby you till the soil of culture in your company, and the values are part of that, right? Yeah. So a really common one, companies I've been at, we've had in staff meetings on a weekly basis, we've had opportunities for people to brag on their colleagues as to where they've seen them live out the values in the past week, right? So somebody might stand up and be like, hey, Will, I want to recognize Will for living out the value of creativity, and he did it in a certain way with a client in this past week. Yeah. So whether it's things like that or it's other ways, we've got to have a way to get the mission, vision, and values off the wall and out of the frame and into the people in the business.
Yeah. And I think that is the difference between a healthy company and a company that's maybe doing well financially, but is unhealthy.
Yeah.
Because like health, like success, health, that sort of thing, it can be defined in many ways.
Yes,
and a lot of times it's easy to take a very strict capitalistic approach, which is if you're in the black every month, able to meet spec with whatever you're making, and your graphs are all going up and to the right, then you're good.
Yeah, and I think the challenge for many people who already have a team that's built out, right, whether they've got 20 or 50 or 100 or 150 employees, is, what do I do when I need to unwind something. Basically, I'm sensing conflict because I have people in my organization that they just don't seem to be the right fit, right? We have that sense sometimes as leaders, and they're not the right fit because they don't value the things that we value, right? They could have the issue of being in the wrong seat. That's a different issue, right? And I think the challenge that takes a lot of boldness as a leader is to sit down with your leadership team and actually go through your roster and say, hey, we're gonna look at each employee and ask whether they're really aligned in living out our values.
Yeah.
And then when we come to a scenario where somebody is really living in a different way and acting in a different way in the workplace than what our values are we willing to do what it takes to create a transition plan, right? To serve our company and both to serve the employee, to help them transition out to a place where they are really aligned. That takes a lot of guts. It has to be done very carefully, has to be done very tactfully, but that takes a lot of guts to do that. But it's always the right move in the long term.
Yeah, it really is. And, and it's not a toxic employee in a sense. It could be. Like they could be if they think that everything is crazy and that everybody's ridiculous and this is all, why am I have to do this extra step?
Yeah.
That can turn into toxicity.
Yes.
But being able to, that's living out your values,
It is.
And that's communicating to your employees
Absolutely.
that it actually means something.
And we hear it all the time. And I'm sure you've got friends or you see posts on social media where people are like, I finally let that toxic person go. So we had that big producing salesperson, but he was always demeaning, employees in the office, or she was always abrupt or rude with employees in the office, right? And so we finally let them go, not because they weren't hitting quota, but because they weren't the right fit. And what's the answer you get from people around you? It's like, well, why did it take you so long?
Exactly.
But they really appreciate it. They really appreciate the company is living out who we've said we are and living in alignment with that.
Yeah.
And to me, that's a big part of what success is in business.
Yeah. And so I would challenge anybody that's listening, anybody that's watching, stop and think about your values. If you're someone who perhaps has, started a business, you're a solopreneur, it's just you, think about like what that means, even as a one person, one man band, and start creating those now, because everybody has a different plan for their business. Maybe you start at one person, maybe you're going to grow it to 100, maybe you're going to grow it even further. But start making those plans now, setting that foundation. Yeah. And I think even having those guidelines, even if you're a solopreneur, is important because it's a reason to exist and allows you to start setting your own standard for yourself.
2 follow-ups on that. The first is this doesn't take a lot of time.
No.
You can do it in 2 hours or less, right? The second thought is, even if you don't have employees, we all have clients, right? Yeah. Well, hopefully we have clients. Otherwise, we're in a tough spot. But you're not aligned, and I'm not aligned to work with every client out there who meets even our customer avatar or buyer persona. Why is that? Because we really even want our customers to at least value our values, to not be living in conflict with our values at a minimum. Yeah. And so the definition of values even goes external. It's not just an internal thing.
Yeah, and that's a very good point. And that's something that, early on, you make all these mistakes, right? But early on, this was something I got right, which I'm so glad for, is that I would interview clients, as you're doing this whole onboarding process, or it's the pre-bid or like in the middle of the bid type process. And I was checking them out to see if they were a good fit for us, even when I didn't have any employees. Because I thought it was important that, if whoever I work with and whoever my contractors work with, are people that are good people, and are good companies.
I mean, let's be honest. We live in the richest country in the world. There's tons of clients out there for everybody. And so I think, this is true with companies who focus in on who their target market is. It's true when we overlay that with, hey, clients that we work with typically value these sort of things. But there's plenty of clients out there in the world. We don't need to spend our time working with people who don't value what we value and see the world in the way that we do. So yeah, I would just encourage anybody who's listening to really get focused in. And I think what they'll really see is that there's actually more clients, more ideal clients out there than they ever thought there really were.
Yeah.
So.
And the amazing thing about social media, podcasting, all these different forms of, reaching out, you can find that niche.
Yes.
Whatever you value.
Yes.
If you're like, man, companies with the logo that has a logo that's green, that's our values. That's the only kind of company that should exist. If that's you, go for it.
You can do it. The niches are, the riches are in the niches,
that's
as they
true.
say.
Yeah,
so.
Absolutely. So you help companies with their marketing messaging as well. The sales
Correct.
and the marketing, those things are different.
Yes, they are.
A lot of times people
often misunderstood.
Yeah, people combine that, but they're different. So let's talk about marketing. Let's talk about the differences. What's the difference between marketing and sales? And we'll go back to marketing.
A lot of different ways that we could distinguish between the two. But in one sense, of course, brand is part of marketing. Future revenue is part of marketing. And we could look at it on time continuum, say marketing is future revenue and sales is near-term revenue. We could look at it a lot of different ways. Yeah. But I think for entrepreneurial companies, I'll say a couple of different things. The first is my experience with entrepreneurial companies is that they're either founded by a technical expert or they're founded by a salesperson. So this is like the engineer who starts an engineering company, the CPA who starts a CPA company, or the salesperson who used to work at ScanSource in town who's like, I can go do this on my own, right?
Right.
So, but what happens in both of those, if we just think about it in terms of revenue generation, what happens in both contexts is the salesperson thinks that sales is the answer to revenue generation, right? And the technical expert typically hires a salesperson first. So we all start with sales, right?
Yeah.
You can't not have sales in your business.
Yeah.
Whether you know you're selling or not, there's a sales function if you're bringing in revenue.
100%.
But here's the problem is that in my experience, these entrepreneurial organizations are sales-led organizations. They're typically not marketing-led organizations, right? Unless you're like a tech startup and you might have a senior marketing leader from day one.
Right.
And so what typically happens is we see revenue generation as sales. We don't see it as marketing and sales. And then another layer I'll throw on this is I would say typically with services companies, somewhere between the $2 to $5 million in revenue mark, we hit a ceiling. And we've hit a ceiling on generating business in a relational manner through sales. And we come to the conclusion that we need to do marketing. And I'm using my air quotes right there, right? But we don't really know what that is.
Yeah.
And that's where many CEOs, many sales-led organizations really start to pump money into marketing. And it doesn't go anywhere. And I think that's at the crux of the issue that might be really interesting to talk about why that is.
Yeah, 100%. And let's discuss that. Do people use like the word marketing and branding simultaneously? Is that kind of like, brand, like we're this is our brand and this is marketing, or is that different as well?
I think quite frankly, people are using marketing much more frequently than branding.
Right. Yeah.
But when people think about brand, I'll address that. Typically, what people are focused on is the logo, the trademark, right? The visual brand is really when people talk about branding in the very small entrepreneurial space. That's what they're focused in on. Of course, those of us who have been in marketing or worked in marketing, we realize, brand is much larger than that.
100%.
Brand is the story that we're telling about our organization. Brand certainly encompasses the visual side of it, but it encompasses much, much more, right?
Yeah.
I think to your point, people are probably talking about marketing much more than branding in the small segment.
Yeah. So what are some of the problems, the pitfalls that people fall into when they get into marketing, and throwing money at it is not the solution?
Yes. Yeah. So typically these are the problems I see in no particular order. Again, I'm mostly focused on entrepreneurial companies. These up to like 200 employee sort of companies. Again, because they've been sales-led and they haven't had a marketing person, when they think of marketing, the first thing that a sales-led organization thinks marketing in is lead generation or demand generation, which is one component of marketing, but it is not all of marketing. So I would actually say the highest value of marketing, right? Like, where do I want to start with marketing with a client? Or what is the need that a client has? It's strategic level marketing. And we're talking about things like the basics. Who is our customer? So in B2B, customer avatar.
Yeah.
How can we describe the company that we work with?
Yeah.
Can we describe it based upon B2B or B2C? Can we describe it based upon an industry? Can we describe it based upon a revenue range or an employee count?
Yeah.
And then going from there and saying buyer personas. Do we really understand who is involved in the buying process in our company? I'd say a couple of challenges that I see there. First off, most companies don't have the buyer personas defined.
No.
So a few things that I'll throw out there. One, I think buyer personas really come alive when we move beyond just basic geographic and demographic information and begin to talk about the psychographic layer.
Yes.
So the psychographic layer being, what is this buyer thinking or feeling, right?
100%.
And so when we can begin to talk about somebody who's got budget authority in a B2B purchase transaction, and maybe they're the VP of this, the manager of that, the COO of that, and we can say they're a man or a woman and they are certain in age range, but we can overlay it with this is what they're feeling, this is what they value, this is what they're thinking.
Yes.
It really comes alive.
100%.
Right? I think the other, and I would say most companies don't have that. I think the other challenge I would say in B2B sales, right, which is where I focus my time and effort.
Yeah.
B2B sales has changed over the last 20 years. And one of the things that we have seen happen is that buying happens through consensus. There's very few pull the lever men and women who just autonomously make decisions on their own anymore. Yeah. We see a manager who wants the input of their team, right? And so the other challenge I see with companies, building out, let's say, buyer personas is, do we really understand who all these people are that are involved in the transaction, and have we identified them?
Right.
Can we put, sort of tags on them so that way every time our sales team is going in, and again, this is the job of marketing to do this work, in my opinion. This is not the VP of sales job. This is the head of marketing's job to define this for sales. Is to say, hey, sales team, when you're going in, there's typically 4 people that we want to be engaged with in an organization, right?
Yeah.
I think things like customer avatar, things like buyer personas, those are strategic level marketing. I think certainly things like messaging that resonates with those buyers, right? Positioning, all those sorts of things, that's really strategic level marketing.
And that psychographic part of it is so important. And that's a piece that is really interesting to me right now, of the reasons why someone buys. The whole thing, like if you're trying to sell, there's this author, I was trying to remember her name, but I'll try to find the book and tell you what it is. But she talks about like the 9 different buying patterns and that sort of thing. And there's 2 major ones, which is away and toward is how she describes it. So if you're trying to sell rubber boots, you can say, don't get your feet wet. Buy my rubber boots.
Sure.
That's half of the population that responds to that.
Okay.
And that's away from. Don't get your feet wet.
Correct.
Then there's toward, which is keep your feet dry.
Yes.
Buy my boots, which is it's a completely different way of framing the proposition. And then there's other ways of people who maybe are independent and they don't want anybody to tell them what to do. You can ask a question. It's like, have you considered boots today? Or 5 things to consider before buying the right rain boots. And each of us respond differently to that.
Well, I think a really interesting part about this is when you think about salespeople typically sell on four types of things. We sell on either product value. So our product has all these different features, right? And it can meet your needs. Service level value. Classically, the solution sellers had moved up to selling on a solutions or an outcomes-oriented basis. We're going to increase revenue by this. We're going to reduce costs by this, right? And then there's sort of this thought leadership sale of value that's there. And I forget why I was going down this path, but it seemed to relate to the last question that you. What was the question you were talking about?
Well, about the impetus of people, psychographics, how they're looking at, like psychology behind it and why they do it. Different people have different values, and and when we market things, just kind of going off of that, when we market things, a lot of times if you have the engineer type person who's the creator, they're going to talk about features.
Correct. And that's actually where I wanted to go with that.
Good,
so I
right.
appreciate you giving me the softball up. But I think classically technical experts always focus on the technical capabilities of things.
Right.
You see this very frequently. I've seen it with clients I've worked with in the last year where they're really good at selling to other technical experts. Engineers selling to engineers at a plant, as an example. But where oftentimes businesses struggle is they grow and they come to a pivot point in their company and they say, you know what, we want to go up market. We want to sell to the C-suite. We want to be a solutions provider, not just doing tactical work at a plant or a single location.
Sure.
But they talk to the C-suite. So they're still selling the same thing, right? It's not an issue of changing the product or the service, but they sell to the C-suite using the same words and focusing on the same benefits as they would a technical buyer, and it's totally wrong.
Absolutely.
Because that's not what the C-suite cares about, right?
And I've had clients who have said, we have this great product. It's superior in every way. And as I've sat with them for hours, we learn about it, and they're right. It is superior in every way, right?
But you know what? The buyer that they want to sell it to will never buy it because they're not speaking the language of that buyer that buyer values.
Right. And the common, if you don't understand marketing, and if you're someone who's not humble, the thing that you're going to say is they just don't get it. They're just too dumb to understand. And it's not the case at all. It's you're too dumb to air quotes, but you're too dumb to dumb it down or talk about the why. Like Simon Sinek, talks about the why.
Absolutely.
Every feature of a product needs to have a why.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's also symptomatic of very reactive versus proactive sales. I think a lot of times what you hear from companies like that is also like, the customer will call us when they need if it's a current client. They'll call us when they want us to quote something. They'll call us when they need our services rather than sort of a proactive, solutions-oriented approach.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Do you, going back to that psychology of a buyer, because that's just so fascinating to me, Donald Miller with StoryBrand frames it this way.
Yeah.
People buy on emotional needs, not necessarily the thing that they need done.
Yes.
So, for instance, in our former house, we were right beside a widower who was retired, and he had nothing to do all day except work on his yard and make it amazing.
I've become a gardening addict, by the way, just to put it out there.
It's very therapeutic, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah. And then, my wife and I, we have a new baby. Starting, we're growing this business, all the stuff going on. We have no time, and my yard gets mowed usually, and it's just only so much. So I look at his yard, I look at my yard, and suddenly I have an emotional need. Yeah. And that is to keep up with the Joneses, right? To not be that guy on the street that has the house that's not quite up to spec, right? Yeah. So then that's why I called someone to do lawn care. Yeah.
But I think to tease this idea out, right? Like you could see your, I'm going to call it crappy looking lawn next to his really nice looking lawn. And we could even look at you calling a lawn service company to take over maintenance and fertilizing to get it looking nice. But just based upon those observable outside things, we still wouldn't know why you bought, right?
Yeah.
Like, did you buy out of envy? Did you buy because you felt terrible emotionally that your lawn looked so bad relative to his?
Yeah.
I mean, we don't really know. And I think that's true in all of businesses, that we oftentimes see the actions on the outside.
Right.
But what the real challenge is to understand the belief system or the feelings or the emotions of people under the hood that lead to the action.
Yeah, exactly. And once you can figure that out, there's a wealth of
open up the floodgates.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's the great thing about, the social media and social media ads, internet ads. There's so much data that we have now.
There is.
And you can get past the demographics in many ways. If anybody's looking to do Facebook ads, there's like A/B testing that you can do, and you can try all these different images and marketing. And we did that with a pharmaceutical company one time where we just ran a whole bunch of ads all the way from fear-based to oh my goodness, your kid's going to get sick and die, to live your best life kind of thing, just to see what would happen and how moms would respond.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating.
What did you find out?
It was kind of a 25 on the wings, and then kind of a 50 in the middle. They didn't like, but a lot of people more like the hopeful messaging than the fear-based. But there were people that did react to that fear-based kind of
Sure.
Are you you shouldn't be worried. And obviously,
Yes.
we didn't go too far because I think there's some responsibility for
Yes, there
companies.
is. Yes, there is.
You don't want to go too crazy, but
Yeah. My sort of on this path, I would just challenge people who are listening, particularly if they're smaller organizations. Maybe they don't have a marketing leader in house. Maybe they're outsourcing. Maybe their budget is limited. Is the smaller that we are, the more focused we have to be. And so it's really interesting. You go to a lot of these conferences and you hear people talk and like, we've got 3 different customer avatars, and we've got 30 different buyer personas we've defined, and we've
Right.
got all these product lines. We don't have time to do that at the small end of the spectrum. And it becomes much more important the smaller that you are to be more focused.
yes.
Because if you're not focused, you will never gain the snowball traction that we all hope to gain
Yep.
in an entrepreneurial company. So
Yep.
I would really encourage that.
100%. Yeah, I worked for a clothing manufacturer who was doing some stylish, type clothing. It was taken off,
Yeah.
that sort of thing, and they shared their spring lookbook or something. As we were about to do this thing, and it was fascinating because it had all these beautiful pictures of models, and
Okay.
just like walking around Charleston, but they had this page that was devoted to the male avatar,
Okay.
the target audience.
Sure.
And they had a page that was dedicated to the female.
Yes.
And they gave them names. They talked about where they lived. They talk
Yes.
about their hobbies. The names of their dog. All. I mean, they went to it was a great storytelling opportunity there that they went kind of above and beyond and just told it in a very colorful way.
Yes.
Which I thought was fascinating because I think what that helps do is just after reading that, I understood.
Correct.
Help
Correct.
communicate.
Yeah, and I love that. I love the sharpness that they have there, but I want to run a counterpoint to that because
Okay.
I'm all about simplicity.
Yeah.
Because I think there could be people listening to your podcast that are just like, oh my gosh, that sounds so difficult. How do I do that? It's going to take me 3 weeks. It's going to take me months. And then they never do it, right?
Right.
And so we've always got to be, like I subscribe to agile deployment methodologies in business, right? Like I worked in tech for 5 years.
Yeah.
It's all about like, we get a deadline, we're doing a sprint, we're going to get it done, we're going to deploy into production,
Yeah.
right? And I think we've got to be comfortable in business with the fact that nothing is ever a finished product.
It's true.
Everything is always subject to feedback, iteration, and improvement. And so I think the question, if you're listening to the podcast, is sort of like, hey, do I have clarity on who my customers are with defining the companies if I'm in B2B, or certainly defining my buyers, whether I'm in B2B or B2C, right? If I don't, how do I take the first step? How do I begin to put the rough draft in place and then talk about it with a couple of friends who I trust, who have experience in marketing, that can help me round it out and take it to the next level?
Yeah. Just having the conversation about it,
Yes.
finding out who your target, just even thinking about it,
Yeah.
and having that conversation is so important.
It
and
is.
that puts you miles ahead of a lot of companies.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, again, it's surprising. People would be like, oh, a $15 million, a $25 million company, they must have it all together. And I'm telling you, I've sat across the table from the CEO, from leaders at companies just like that, and they cannot give me a clear answer about who their buyers are and who their target markets are.
I had a meeting, and I think I shared this on the podcast before, with a company that did $1 billion in sales the previous year.
Okay.
Whose senior staff in the marketing department did not know who their target audience was and who they were selling to.
Yeah.
And they couldn't answer that question because that's literally the first question I ask
Yes.
in any meeting.
Yeah.
Who are we talking to?
Correct.
And they did not know who it was, and it was just, I was like, oh man, it's just dangerous.
Just to nail this point home, I would say, I said this to somebody recently, if we don't have clarity on our customer avatar and our buyer personas, we are wasting money on every marketing and sales tactic.
100%.
So if that isn't clear, everything else is going to be a funk. You'll get some stuff done, right? But you won't get nearly as much done as you could if you just stop and take the time on that front.
100%. And then that allows you to then for everything that you do, whether you're doing a sales pitch, you have a sales funnel, you have any kind of verbiage that's on your website or anywhere else. It basically says, does the person that I'm selling to Do they respond to this?
Correct.
You know,
I
that's
love
the
it.
only question you have to ask. You know,
love it.
and that helps you. I mean, that saves you money, lots of money. So
And lots of time.
yes, which is the thing that you can't get back.
Correct.
Which you can get money. So let's talk about sales a little bit. We kind of bumped
Yes.
into that as we were
Let's
discussing.
go.
But what are some common problems that companies run into with sales?
It's the problem that we have in every line of business. Is there clarity? Because without clarity, it's going to be very difficult for us to take action in an accountable way. So I'll flesh this out and tell you what I mean. So typically, if I'm working with an organization and they're looking to scale their sales organization, or they're saying, hey, I've got challenges. Maybe it's a CEO, and he's like, I've got somebody who's the head of sales, but I'm not really confident in what we're doing. I'm going to go in and I'm going to start asking some of the basic questions. We're going to start looking at some of the sales data. Which if they don't have sales data, that's the first flag, right? Like, do we have a CRM, and are we getting information out of it in a meaningful way? And a couple of the stats that I'm always interested in from the get-go are the duration of our sales cycle in days. So literally, how long does it take to go from a sales qualified opportunity to closing it or losing it? What you always see is that a lost opportunity takes longer to get to than a won opportunity.
Interesting.
Oh yes, always is the case.
Super interesting.
So if it takes 60 days for a company in B2B sales to win an opportunity, it'll always be 90 to lose it.
Wow.
But I'm always looking at duration and looking at win rates. So if we look at the total volume of sales pipeline, right? So let's say we create $1 million of sales pipeline. How much of that in dollars and then in units separately do we win, and how much do we lose? I would say if you're in B2B services and your win rate is less than 40%, there's probably a challenge that's there.
Yeah.
If you're like a really high quality, really high service sort of offering, and your win rate is less than 40%. And typically the problem that is there when the win rate is less than 40% is that there are not great definitions around what a sales qualified opportunity is and what a target company is, right? So a target company might be like, hey, we work with manufacturers doing $100 to $500 million in revenue.
Yeah, right.
But when we get somebody on the phone from that manufacturer and we start talking about working together and we qualify them, like what are the questions that they need to answer in the affirmative to not just be a conversation, but be a sales qualified conversation?
Right.
And so typically what you see is that the lower the win rate in the pipeline, there's a correlation between that and the company very poorly qualifying. Does that make sense?
Yes, 100%. And if you can fix it at the beginning,
yes,
and figure out how to qualify the correct potential client, then that saves you so many resources and time and just, oh my goodness.
And again, with all this stuff, it doesn't take a lot of time. Right? Yeah. Like a lot of folks may not know how to do it. They need to reach out to somebody who does know how to do this sort of work, right? Yeah. But at the end of the day, these aren't things that take full day sessions to define. These are things that can be defined oftentimes in a matter of an hour or 2 hours, right? And you think about the efficiency you're bringing your sales team by not wasting their precious time on people who are never going to buy from you.
Yeah.
Right? So
for us, it's 30 minutes.
Yeah.
In 30 minutes, we can figure out, what's your budget?
Yep.
What's the scope, the scale of kind of what you're wanting to do? Does it fit in those categories that we're most proficient in? If you're wanting to be in a category that we haven't done too much, is that a category that we're wanting to get into? So that we're open to that. And then it's just kind of culture. Do you kind of fit with this person? Or you can the questions that they're asking?
Absolutely.
We had an instance where someone recently that they didn't want to get on a sales call with me. Like they just basically said,
they pump me your quote.
Yeah, just give me the quote. And for our business especially, like we have to know how many days, how many people, like all that kind of affects. Are we bringing actors in or not? Are we using in-house, talent? Is it documentary style? Is it a narrative where we're going to be scripting and a bunch of stuff? And they weren't willing to do that. And so basically, I just said, well, I don't think we're a good fit.
Yeah, I would say a great rule of thumb for people listening on the podcast is a couple things. Don't be afraid in a first phone call to throw out a really wide range of budget. Yeah. Most of the time what you find when you ask a client like, hey, what's your budget? What were you anticipating this cost? Is they play dumb either because they are dumb or because they're like, oh, I was hoping you could help me with that. So, it's okay to set a pricing range.
Yeah.
You'd be like, hey, typically our organization, something like this would be, 50 to 150 grand, right? Do you have budget for that? But when it comes to giving proposals, never produce a proposal unless you already know it's the right fit for the client and they're ready to sign. And never deliver a proposal unless you know exactly what is going to happen after you deliver it. And if that sounds foreign, again, you probably have a low win rate.
Yeah.
Another big thing I'll hit on with sales is sales process. So, again, I think there's been an evolution in sales. In fact, I know there's been an evolution in sales over the last 20 years, right? And so 20 years ago, there was sort of a thought process that you met with a client, you sort of uncovered the pain, you pumped out a proposal, and once you handed the proposal over, that was when sort of sales started, right?
Yeah, right.
It was sort of like, I'm going to really strong arm you, right, into buying from me. I'm going to overcome objections.
Yeah.
That's where sort of this methodology comes from.
Yeah.
I would say that is a terrible methodology of sales unless you're in a commodity-based sale, right? But if you're in B2B, solutions-oriented sales, where you're solving problems and your tickets that you sell are 25 grand, 50 grand and up, I would really encourage folks to think about implementing a methodology of sales where we're really collaborating with the client and we're getting them to make small commitments along the way. So personally, I subscribe to a methodology of sales where there's 10 commitments in B2B solution selling.
Yeah.
So our first one is the commitment for time. I got to convince somebody to sit down and give me time, right? But then beyond that, it's sort of the commitment to explore the dissonance of the issue that they're experiencing, the commitment to invest in solving that issue. But again, there's all these little commitments, and as we obtain those commitments throughout the sales process, it's a very collaborative effort, and we're also designing a solution that the client can say yes to.
Yep.
Rather than pumping out a generic thing and the client says, yeah, that's not what I need, I'm not going to do business with you.
Right.
Right.
And that's so important. The trust factor too that it builds is important because if they're able to believe that you are the person that can fix their problem and meet their need, and it's not like, hey, Micah, what are you going to do about this problem? Here's my solution. But we're standing side by side and we're looking at the same problem, and I go, well, what are we going to do about this problem? That's a whole different emotional and mental mindset. And the sale is done then. Right, you're set. Then it's about just numbers. It's about scope, and it's about how much help do you get.
I would say for people maybe listening on the podcast that want to grow a sales organization, maybe they've got a small sales team. Maybe it's as small as a team of one right now, right? And they're looking at the next hire and the next hire, or maybe they've been frustrated because they hired a salesperson in the past and it didn't work out. I would really challenge them on the preparation that leads to the hire being successful, right? It's the definitions around qualification. It's the definitions around what the sales process looks like. It's scripting out how the sales process works, literally in words.
Right.
It's all those tools in the tool bag, the messages that we want to say to people, identifying who these buyers are. If you don't have that, you are wasting really precious resources on salary for a salesperson that you have set up for failure.
Yeah. Yeah, and then you're basing their employment, their income and everything based off of, a failure that's really coming from the top.
Exactly.
And something that's out there. And so then we'll have someone who's frustrated and they may not have solutions and they're looking for the solutions.
And more often than not, what happens is the leaders of the organization say, well, that person didn't have what it took. Right.
Yeah.
And salespeople get a lot of bad raps, and many of them for good reason. But I think we always want to look to ourselves as leaders and say, how did I enable my team to flourish, or how have I not enabled my team to flourish? And I think if you're the head of revenue, you're the leader of an organization, and you're looking at growing the sales component of your business, but yet you don't have clarity on some of these issues we've talked about, stop. Put the job posting on hold. Get the clarity on these issues that you can do in literally a couple of days or a week's worth of work. And then you're going to see the really powerful things take shape as you bring people on board.
100%. All it needs is verbalization.
Yes.
and just making it something tangible from kind of in your mind to writing it down, whether you're someone who writes by hand or you use an iPad or you use a laptop, whatever, just write it down and at least start there.
Yes.
And that's going to help provide more clarity to you personally.
Yes.
And then you'll say like, oh, well, this is actually interesting. I should share this.
Because you're right. Once you've got it written down, then really what your goal is for any process in a business, sales process, hiring process, fulfillment process. You want that process shared by everyone, right? And that's a common challenge in sales and delivery, is that we have processes, but there's no inspection, there's no enforcement of the process. And so we sort of wonder why the crackers, pardon me, come out the other side of the machine, crispy sometimes and toasty another time, which actually leads to an interesting client story. I had a client who was in engineering services. I was doing some coaching with the CEO of the company, and they had a client who was in they would make those little snack crackers, right? And they shared with me a story, and they were just like, hey, the client hired us because the crackers would go through the oven, and sometimes it would come out crispy, like too crispy, and sometimes it would come out soggy. Like, oh boy, we're in manufacturing. We're trying to make a consistent product. This is the absolute antithesis of what we want, right? So how do you go about fixing the problem? Well, they started to put in sensors to sort of monitor the process, right? And monitor when the process was going awry and the conditions under which it was going awry. And what they found out was that there was a maintenance guy who would come in late at night and he would like open some valve because that's what people always did. Yeah. And that's what caused some of the dysfunction in how the crackers came out, a little too crispy, a little too soggy, right? And I think the application is there in sales or any sort of process, is that the first step to getting better is to define the process. The second step to getting better is we want everybody to share it, and then the third step is sort of like we want to have visibility into that process and see, okay, is the reason that we're getting a bad outcome, the crispy or the soggy cracker, because we weren't following the process, or is it because we were following the process and the process, so the recipe needs to be tweaked? Right? Yeah. And so I think in any arena of businesses we look to improve. That's sort of a true story. Yeah, and that's a great one. I was listening to a podcast, and the CEO was minimizing processes and saying they weren't important, and hire people that don't need processes, and that restricts and confines. And I see it as freedom, because it allows you to fix the right problem. Yeah, I had a colleague when I most recently worked in tech, and sometimes I get involved in consulting engagements with clients with my team, and he would frequently say to clients, like, what are the constraints? Like, we want a blue sky think, it's not, but there comes a point in time when you have constraints, and the thing he would always say to clients is constraints are not bad. And I think many of us think about constraints as bad things, but really once we set the guardrails up, going back to gardening, the size of the garden that we have to take care of becomes smaller, and we can sort of begin flourishing within that. And you can become an expert in your little patch versus having to till the 10 acres or whatever. Yeah, and I would just say on process development, I think there is a strong correlation in process development, specifically for operations and delivery. So whatever it is that you do, if you can define that process, right, and you can have consistency adhere to that process, what is the outcome of that? Yeah, right. To me, I feel like it's two or three things. Customer experience will go through the roof because you are delivering a consistent experience every time. It's like franchising, right? Yeah. And then secondly, you will become a more profitable company. Why? Because you really understand what it takes to deliver your product or service, and the time and the effort and the cost will become very transparent, right? Things aren't hidden. So I really am a big believer in process development, but focusing in on like documenting the 20% of the process that really conveys 80% of the gain. Right. And then, if you get your process efficient, that means maybe you don't have to bring in as many clients. You don't have to work so hard. Absolutely. Because if you're saving that money, it's like, well, maybe you can work a little slower and a little better. And then secondly, like if you're a solo entrepreneur, or maybe you only have a few employees, that allows you to start leaving a legacy and creating a business that you can retire from. Yeah, I totally agree with that statement. One of the companies that I've worked for in the past, when I started working there, we had I want to say about 375 clients when I came on board. And we were a quality-led organization, a service-led organization. We were not the low-cost provider on sort of that like QSP triad of business. But I think after I left, 4 years later, we probably had 150 clients. We generated more revenue. We were much more profitable as a percentage of revenue, like EBITDA or net operating income as a percentage of revenue was 10 times high. Well, not 10 times, but it was a lot higher.
Yeah.
And our employees were much more satisfied. Our clients were much more satisfied, right? So
there's something to that, and that's something important, and that's something that we look to even with our company. It's just like, how can we? It's not necessarily charge more, but it's get efficient and find the companies whose values align with ours as far as budget and needs.
Well, it's always about, and I actually want to challenge you on that sort of mindset about charging more, but it's always about value that we can deliver 100%. To a client, right? So every good business relationship has an exchange of value. And I always say to clients that I work with, if you give me $1, I want to give you at least 10 back.
Yeah.
Right? Like typically when I work with a client, my ROI is somewhere between 10 and 20x. But at the end of the day, when we get into the mindset of low cost, now again, this relates to business model. There's a lot more discussion here. But when we get into the mindset of being the low cost provider, we oftentimes hem ourselves in. We oftentimes handicap ourselves. What we really want to be thinking with our clients is, as we understand them, because we define their buyer personas, what do they really need? What's the pain that they're feeling? Right. How can I help solve that? And then what would be an appropriate payout for, as a percentage of the value that I create, right? So lots of different pricing models that are out there. And I think oftentimes for entrepreneurial companies, they get stuck into time and effort pricing models.
Right.
We charge so much per hour, when really their client would be willing to pay them way more money because they are solving really thorny issues for their client.
Right. And then looking at it from a standpoint, like you said, of, if I could guarantee, you can't guarantee anything, but if I can guarantee I'm giving you $10 back for every dollar you give to me, how many dollars would you give me?
Oh, yeah. I do guarantee, by the way.
Do you?
You should too.
That's awesome.
I have a 90-day guarantee with clients.
Awesome.
I always say to clients, if you're not seeing the indicators, and we define these in sort of our pre-engagement sales process, but if you're not seeing certain indicators go up and to the right by the time we get to day 90, you don't have to pay me a dime. Which really, I think this will translate to something we talked about a little bit earlier, but it flips a little bit of the sales process on its head, right?
Yeah.
Oh, it was a conversation we had about values and being aligned with clients on values. But for me, I'm very interested in understanding who this client is as I engage with them to say, can we really do this? Are they really ready? Are they the sort of person that they're willing to put in the reps and pump the iron over the next 90 days, where we can literally see those indicators move up into the right? Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's good. And having the right client to execute with is so important.
Yes.
For sure. I mean, I could talk to you all day.
We could keep going.
This has been a blast. So I'd like to close with some kind of like quick fire type questions.
Let's do
a little bit.
Let's do it.
Some of these can be like, I'm trying to get my iPad to work here. Some of these can be a little bit longer and philosophical.
Okay,
here's
sure.
a doozy, right? How do you
personally
balance life and work?
Ooh. So first off, I hate that concept.
Yeah.
Because what that concept implies is that work is not life and life is not work. When we talk about balancing work-life, right? What I prefer to think about is my calling. What do I feel that I'm called to do? What do I feel that I've been uniquely put here on this earth to do? Whether that's in business, in the relationships, I'm a father, I'm a husband. In my church community, I'm a person of faith, and so I'm part of a church. But what am I called to do? What are the different spheres of life I'm called in? What are the constraints I have? Which clearly time is one of those.
Right.
And then you begin to very clearly, it's funny, the older I've gotten, I've realized the importance of living a life of purpose and success, living in alignment with who I want to be is saying no. Yeah. It's getting clear on who I am, why I'm here, what I'm out to do, and saying no. Because my time is very limited, and I'm sure that's something that everybody struggles with, right?
Yeah. Well, that's good. How do you define success?
Yeah, I really define a lot of ways I could answer the question. I'll answer it in a personal context, not a business context. I think I would define success as, I'm having a blank here. It happens sometimes.
Success is remembering the answer to the question.
You got it. You've seen it. You've seen a couple of my flaws today.
No.
But any event, I think success is getting clear. This is the way I would answer it personally. Getting clear on why I exist here on this earth, living my life in alignment with it, and being content. And I add the being content part. So I think, why I'm here on earth, living in alignment with it. Everybody's got different value system. They've got we're answering those big questions of life. Where did I come from? Where am I going? Sort of questions.
Right.
Many of us have family traditions, a faith history, whatever it is, and we come to answering that question in a different way, but we've got to live in alignment with it.
Sure.
And we've got to be content with that, because I think we live in a day and age where through social media, the negative side of social media is that everybody's living an amazing life, and we can feel like success is having a videographer like Gary Vee who's following us around everywhere.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Or we can feel like success comes from the hustle gospel, which I don't subscribe to, by the way, of working all the time. Or we can feel like success is something other than what I have. But getting clear on why you're here, living in alignment with that, and then being content, I think would be my answer.
Yeah. I mean, contentment is such a big thing that I think is a challenge for this culture today, especially with Instagram. And I mean, that's a whole different
struggle
podcast.
with it. We all struggle with it at different moments, right? It's not just like, oh, I don't struggle with it and you struggle with it. It's just we all struggle with that envy, right, at different times of the day, at different emotional states that we may be in. I think it's very important to be aware of that.
Yeah, it truly is. So what are you thinking about currently? What's the thing that's fascinating? It could be about anything. It doesn't be about marketing, whatever. I mean, right now I'm fascinated about Judge Judy. I'm thinking about her.
Tell me about that.
Okay. Well, so I read an article about Judge Judy. She is the highest paid TV personality.
I saw that
currently.
article. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like $47 million, I think.
Crazy.
And so it makes me go, okay, CBS doesn't operate in a vacuum. They do things for a reason, and they have really, really smart people making smart decisions, you think, hopefully, So if they're paying her $47 million, that means they're making a whole lot more money
than that.
Yeah.
It's funny. I read that article. Every year she meets with an exec at CBS. She writes down on a piece of paper what she wants to be paid for that year, puts it in an envelope, and pushes it across the table. There's no negotiation. Apparently, that's how she negotiates her pay raise every year.
I mean, have you seen her show? I'm sure they're scared of her.
She's been on forever. She's been on forever.
It's so fake too. It's not even. Yeah. But it's interesting that somebody that if I were to, without seeing the article, if I were to say who's the highest paid, I would say maybe it's maybe Wheel of Fortune, Jeopardy type host, or maybe it's Ellen,
absolutely, sure.
Or maybe it's a newscaster or something like that. But for it to be Judge Judy of all people, it's just an interesting phenomenon.
So I'll answer your question rapid fire. A couple different things that are on my mind. Our criminal justice system and our prison incarceration system. Is it fair? Is it just? Is it actually accomplishing what we want it to accomplish? That's like a whole hour-long podcast, right? I've really been thinking about that a lot. I'm a big reader. I probably read 50 books easy plus a year, right? But I was really moved by a book I just read called Just Mercy that my wife got me for Christmas. I understand they made a movie of this Q4 of last year. Okay. But it's a young African-American attorney in the early 1980s who starts representing death row inmates in Alabama because apparently death row inmates in Alabama were denied public defenders. Wow. So just really interesting stuff. I think sort of a separate sort of thing around that is just I've really become interested in what shapes us in life, like our family upbringing, our habits, all those sorts of things. I've really become a believer over the last year that our actions don't come out of nowhere. Like I've seen this in my own life. Yeah. Is like we see an action on the outside, but really we don't know why somebody's doing that. And sort of under the hood, there's like a belief that's there. Right. And sometimes that person knows the belief, but a lot of times we don't know what the belief is because it's like something that we've been shaped to value through the family that we were brought up in over the course of our life. Sure. So I'm really interested in that. on a more low-key note, I'm interested in gardening. I'm doing some drainage work in my house right now, and I'm learning to garden really well. And I've got a 5-year-old boy who's going to go to kindergarten this fall, so of course we're starting to get into all the education conversations. So
what kind of gardening?
What kind of gardening? Well, actually, so we did a big landscape renovation last year, and I paid somebody else a lot of money to come in and do all sorts of things.
Yeah.
But here's the thing I love about gardening is I feel like in business, we're always focused on actions and the results they're going to bring about in the current quarter or even for the current year. But what you begin to see about gardening is it's a slow man's game. Yeah. So what I mean by that is like I didn't, but this company planted bushes for me last year, right? Like how long does it take a bush to grow to maturity? Like sometimes it can be 3 years, 5 years, like plus. Yeah. And lots of different things I'm interested in gardening, but I love being outdoors. I love being in the sunshine and, all that sort of stuff. It's good, for us just physically.
Yes.
But I'm really I'm always challenged when I go outside and I see the variety of the plants and the trees and the blossomings of the different times of year and just the work that's involved or the long time it takes for something to come to fruition. I think there's something good about that in this sort of like instantaneous society that we live in.
Yeah, it's fascinating just to work the soil.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
What's a resource that you recommend, like a blog or a podcast or a book?
Yeah. A couple I'll throw out really quickly. So the book I alluded to that EOS is based upon that we talked about in this podcast. And that book is titled Traction, and the author is Gino Wickman. Another book I'd really recommend that I like is The Lost Art of Closing by Anthony Iannarino. I'm probably going to get the spelling wrong, but this is sort of this philosophy that sales is about 10 small commitments, not just delivering a proposal and strong-arming. Yeah. So those would be two that sort of come to mind, just right off the bat. So
that's fascinating. I'll check those out.
Yeah.
And last question, where can people find you online? Yeah,
great question. So really two places. I have a website up, micahbrandenburg.com. So MICAHBRANDENBURG.com. A lot of content there in the footer of my site. People can click on a link, sign up for my weekly Growth Insights email, so I promise I don't spam anybody. And then sort of the second place I'm really on with being pressed for time is LinkedIn. And so I post a lot of content on LinkedIn. I post a lot of really helpful videos around topics we've talked about, even on this podcast. So my website, email that I send out weekly, and then sort of videos and content on LinkedIn.
Yeah, your LinkedIn videos are great. So
awesome.
We're friends, and I enjoy seeing them every time they drop. Whenever the algorithm will let me see them. Whenever it deems.
Good stuff.
It's important. But thanks, man, for so much for sitting down with me. It's absolutely fascinating. We could have gone on for hours. There's lots more that we've left on the table, so let's do it again sometime.
Definitely.
But for anybody that's listening, watching, go to fireatwillpodcast.com, and you'll see like show notes, links to the books that Micah recommends, some highlights from the show. So thanks everybody for watching. Thanks everybody for listening, and we'll see you later.